The fluorescent lights in the Landstuhl Regional Medical Center hummed with that particular frequency that made wounded men remember field hospitals closer to the fight. Staff Sergeant David Riley sat in the interview room with his right hand wrapped in clean white bandages that would never bring back what the bullets had taken. His left hand, still whole, rested on the table between him and the Criminal Investigation Command officer, whose nameplate read Colonel Marsh. The colonel had a face carved from the same stone as Mount Rushmore, weathered by decades of asking questions that good men did not want to answer. He clicked his pen twice, a nervous habit that probably helped him think, and studied Riley's file like it contained secrets that might still be classified 50 years from now. Outside the window, German winter rain fell in sheets that obscured the mountains beyond. Riley watched the water streak down the glass and thought about snow. He would always think about snow now. "You want to know why I am alive?" Riley said, his voice carrying the flat tone of a man who had rehearsed this conversation in his head 1,000 times since the morphine wore off. "Because a woman nobody believed held her rifle while she slept. 3 seconds, sir. That is all that stood between Iron Hollow and a massacre. 3 seconds she gave us." Colonel Marsh leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight, a sound too ordinary for the weight of what they were discussing. The recording device on the table captured every word, every pause, every breath that carried the smell of antiseptic and the phantom scent of cordite that would never quite wash out of Riley's memories. "Sergeant Kane is being recommended for court-martial. Not a medal," the colonel said. His words fell like hammer blows on an anvil, each one measured and deliberate. "Help me understand why a soldier who allegedly saved 43 lives is facing charges that could end her career." Riley looked down at his bandaged hand. The doctor said he would regain maybe 60% function if the physical therapy went well. 60%. He wondered what percentage of himself he had left after Iron Hollow. What fraction of the man who had deployed remained after the storm. "We lost 4 men that night," Riley said. The words came out rough, like gravel scraped across concrete. "But, sir, we should have lost 47. The colonel made a note on his yellow legal pad. His handwriting was precise, the kind of careful script taught at West Point, where officers learned that every word on paper could become evidence, could become history, could become the difference between a medal and a firing squad. "Walk me through it," Marsh said. "Start at the beginning." Riley closed his eyes. Behind his lids he saw snow, endless fields of white, broken only by the dark geometry of a forward operating base that should never have been built where they built it. He saw her face, angular and hard, eyes that had seen too much and refused to look away. "The beginning," Riley said, and something that might have been a laugh or might have been a sound caught in his throat. "Sir, the beginning was 3 years before Iron Hollow. The beginning was a rooftop in Mosul where Sergeant Sarah Kane learned that 3 seconds is the difference between breathing and bleeding." The colonel waited. Good interrogators always knew when silence would extract more than questions. "Her spotter's name was Marcus Davis," Riley continued. He opened his eyes and looked directly at the colonel now, willing him to understand what words could barely carry. "Davis was the best in the battalion, calm under fire, could read wind patterns that looked like chaos to everyone else. He and Kane were a package deal, the kind of team that gets written up in after-action reports with words like exceptional and irreplaceable." "What happened to Davis?" "He died because he put his rifle down to pour a cup of coffee." The rain against the window seemed louder now, or maybe it was just that the silence in the room had grown heavier. Colonel Marsh set down his pen. Riley continued, the words coming faster now like water through a broken dam. They were on overwatch, covering a patrol moving through a market sector that intelligence swore was secure. Davis had been awake for 22 hours straight. Kane told him to get some rest, but he said he just needed coffee, just 5 minutes to clear his head. He propped his rifle against the sandbags and walked 15 feet to where they kept the thermos. And 3 seconds later, an RPG came through a window they had not been watching closely enough. Davis died reaching for his weapon. Kane survived because hers was already in her hands. The colonel picked up his pen again. This time he did not click it. "How do you know it was 3 seconds?" "Because Kane counted," Riley said. "She counts everything now. Seconds between heartbeats. Seconds to acquire a target. Seconds it takes a man to decide between his weapon and his comfort. She told me once that Davis used to joke about her paranoia, used to call her Iron Maiden because she slept with her rifle like it was a lover she could not bear to be parted from, even in dreams. After Mosul, I imagine that paranoia looked different. Sir, after Mosul, that paranoia kept us alive." Colonel Marsh made another note. Walk me through Iron Hollow. When did you first meet Sergeant Kane? Riley felt the familiar ache in his missing fingers. Phantom pain the doctor said would fade with time. They were wrong about a lot of things, those doctors. Pain had a way of making itself permanent when it was born from the kind of memories that did not fade. 72 hours before the attack, Riley said. I will take you there. The words hung in the air like smoke, and then Riley began to speak in earnest, his voice taking on the cadence of a man who had told this story to himself every night since it happened, refining it, polishing it, making it into something that might help someone somewhere understand what they had lived through. Iron Hollow was not supposed to be anything special, just another forward operating base, one of dozens scattered across the province like seeds thrown by a careless farmer. It sat in a valley shaped like a bowl, surrounded by ridges that rose up white and silent under perpetual snow. The strategic value was minimal. We were there to maintain presence, to show the locals that we had not abandoned them, to provide a quick reaction point if the villages to the south needed support. That was the official reason anyway. Kane saw it different from the start. I remember the morning she arrived. I was on motor pool duty, checking the Humvees for the third time that week because Lieutenant Morrison was the kind of officer who believed that discipline meant following every regulation, even when those regulations were written by men who had never seen combat. She walked past me carrying a rifle case and a rucksack that looked like it weighed more than she did. And I thought, here comes another one who thinks this deployment will be different. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. She set up in the sniper hide we had built on the north side of the compound, a position that gave clear sight lines to the ridges but was exposed to the wind that came down from the mountains like the breath of something huge and cold and patient. Most snipers would request a transfer to a more comfortable position within a week. Kane stayed there for 3 months, watching those ridges like they were enemies that had not yet revealed themselves. The other men started calling her the Mad Woman of Iron Hollow. Not to her face, of course. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like she was calculating exactly how long it would take you to die if circumstances shifted just slightly. It was not a cruel look, just analytical, the way a surgeon might study an X-ray of a tumor. Lieutenant Morrison hated her from day one. He was 26 years old, fresh from some staff assignment where his biggest challenge had been making PowerPoint slides look professional for generals who did not care. West Point had taught him that leadership meant maintaining standards. And to him, Kane represented everything wrong with the modern military. Undisciplined, insubordinate, too comfortable with the gray areas between orders and survival. Their first confrontation happened on a morning when the temperature had dropped to 15 below and the wind was trying to peel the skin off any exposed flesh. I was in the command tent when Morrison walked in with Kane's squad leader, Sergeant First Class Chen. Morrison's face was red and not from the cold. Sergeant Kane refuses to store her weapon in the armory, Morrison said. His voice had that clipped quality of a man trying very hard to sound older than he was. I have given her a direct order, and she has declined to comply. Kane stood at parade rest, her M24 rifle held in a low-ready position that was not quite threatening, but also not quite regulation. She looked at Morrison the way you might look at a child who insists that monsters under the bed are not real because adults say so. Sir, with respect, my weapon does not leave my person, Kane said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight, the way a single stone can start an avalanche if it falls from the right height. The regulation you are citing was written for garrison operations. We are not in garrison. Morrison's jaw clenched. I could see the muscles working under his skin. We are in a secure forward operating base 60 kilometers from the nearest contact. The armory exists for a reason, Sergeant. Weapons not in active use will be properly stored. This is not negotiable. Kane did not move. How secure were the barracks in Mosul, sir? Morrison blinked. I was not in Mosul. No, sir, you were not. The temperature in the tent seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Chen, to his credit, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I focused very hard on the supply manifest I was pretending to read. Morrison took a step forward. You have 24 hours to comply with this order, Sergeant Kane. If your weapon is not in the armory by this time tomorrow, you will be written up for insubordination, and I will personally request your transfer to a unit that appreciates the importance of following orders. Kane's expression did not change. Understood, sir. She saluted, performed an about face, and walked out of the tent. Through the open flap, I watched her return to her position on the north ridge. that rifle still cradled in her arms, like it was the only thing in the world she could trust. Chen waited until Morrison had left before he approached me. His face was troubled in the way that good NCOs get when they see a collision coming and know they are powerless to stop it. "Riley, you have been here longer than most," Chen said. "What do you know about Kane?" I shrugged. "Not much. She keeps to herself. Does her job. Best shot I have ever seen." Chen nodded slowly. I looked her up in the system. 2 tours, 17 confirmed kills. Silver Star for actions in Mosul, where she held a position alone for 6 hours after her spotter was killed. Psych eval flagged her for possible PTSD, but she passed the screening. "So what is the problem?" Chen looked out toward the ridge where Kane had disappeared. "The problem is that she might be the only one here who understands how easy it is for Secure to become slaughtered." I thought about that conversation a lot in the days that followed. At the time, I dismissed it as Chen being overcautious, the way senior NCOs sometimes got when they had seen too many young soldiers make stupid mistakes. But Chen had been in Fallujah. He knew what sudden violence looked like when it arrived uninvited. That night, I made a decision that probably saved my life. I went to find Kane. She was in her position, of course, seated behind a low wall of sandbags with her rifle resting on a bipod that gave her a stable platform for shots out to 1,000 meters. The moon was nearly full and the snow reflected its light, turning the valley into a monochrome photograph of itself. She did not turn when I approached, but I knew she had heard me. "You did not survive 2 tours by being unaware of your surroundings." "Sergeant Kane," I said. "Got a minute?" She glanced back at me. Her eyes were pale gray, the color of winter sky before a storm. In the moonlight, they looked almost silver. "Speak your piece, Riley," she said. My last name still sounded strange in her voice, like she was using it for the first time, even though we had been on the same base for weeks. I sat down on the sandbags, careful not to disturb her sight picture. "What are you looking for out there?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her words came slowly, like she was translating thoughts from a language that had no direct equivalent in English. "Patterns," she said. "The wind moves snow in predictable ways. When those patterns change, it means something disrupted them. Could be an animal, could be a weather shift, could be men trying to move without being seen." "You think someone is out there?" Kane adjusted her scope, making micro corrections to the focus. "I think Iron Hollow was designed by someone who either did not care about defensive positioning or wanted us to be vulnerable. We are in a bowl, Riley. Anyone on those ridges has high ground and clear fields of fire. Our thermals are good to about 800 meters in clear weather. After that, we are trusting luck and the assumption that nobody wants to kill us badly enough to walk through a blizzard. That seems paranoid." She turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I saw something in her face that made my stomach clench. It was not fear, exactly. It was knowledge. The kind of terrible understanding that comes from watching someone die because they trusted the wrong assumption. "Marcus Davis said the same thing," Kane said quietly, "right before he died." I did not know what to say to that. The wind picked up, carrying snow crystals that stung like tiny needles against my cheeks. Somewhere in the valley below, a nightbird called out, its voice lonely and strange. "What do you want me to do?" I asked finally. Kane turned back to her scope. "Your father was in the Gulf War, right?" I blinked at the non sequitur. "How did you know that?" "I make it my business to know the men I might have to fight beside," she said. "What did he tell you about trusting officers?" "My father had been a combat engineer in Desert Storm, had cleared mines and built bridges under fire from an enemy that melted away like smoke. He came home with a Bronze Star and nightmares about burning oil fields that took 15 years to stop haunting his sleep. Before he got treatment, he told me stories about the war, lessons wrapped in anecdotes about men who lived and men who did not. He said to trust the sergeants who had seen combat," I said, "not the maps drawn in air-conditioned offices." Kane nodded. "Smart man. In the next 72 hours, there is going to be a blizzard. Worst storm this region has seen in 5 years, according to the weather forecast. Our quick reaction force is 90 minutes away by helicopter in good conditions. In a blizzard, they might as well be on the moon. You think someone will attack during the storm?" It was not a question, and she did not treat it like one. "If I wanted to hit this base, that is when I would do it," Kane said. "We will be blind, deaf, and alone. By the time anyone realizes what is happening, it will be over." I looked out at the ridges, trying to see them the way she saw them, as threat vectors and kill zones instead of just landscape. The moonlight made everything look peaceful, serene, like a Christmas card painted by someone who had never seen winter as anything other than beautiful. "What do you need?" I heard myself ask. Kane smiled then. It was not a happy expression. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for the question and was relieved that someone had finally asked it. "Help me build insurance," she said. "The kind Morrison will court-martial us for." And that was how it began. Over the next 2 days, while Morrison focused on inspections and paperwork and the thousand small tyrannies that gave his command meaning, Kane and I prepared Iron Hollow for a war that nobody else believed was coming. We moved slowly, working in the gaps between duties, making changes that would look like routine maintenance to anyone who did not know what they were seeing. We restrung the Claymore mines along the north perimeter, placing them at ankle height instead of the regulation knee height. Kane explained it while we worked, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "Professionals expect knee height," she said, her hands steady despite the cold as she adjusted the firing wire. "They will go prone or crouch when they hit the perimeter. Ankle placement catches them by surprise." "What if we hit civilians?" Kane paused, looking at me with those pale eyes. There are no civilians walking through a blizzard at 3 in the morning, 60 kilometers from the nearest village, Riley. Anyone out there in those conditions is either lost, which means they will die anyway, or they are coming to kill us. It was brutal logic, but I could not argue with it. We cached ammunition at 3 separate fallback positions, burying the cans under snow, and marking them with subtle landmarks that would only mean something if you knew where to look. We ran tripwires at angles that defied the training manuals, creating overlapping fields where anyone trying to breach the perimeter would trigger multiple alerts. Chen found us on the second night. We were in the motor pool, ostensibly checking tire pressure, but actually securing extra magazines in hidden compartments that turned maintenance spaces into improvised armories. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the mess hall lights, and I knew we had been caught. Kane looked up from her work. Her hands did not stop moving. "Evening, Sergeant Chen." Chen walked closer. His boots crunched on the frozen ground. "What are you two doing?" "Preparing," Kane said simply. "For what?" "For when paranoia becomes prophecy." Chen studied her for a long moment. Then he knelt down and started helping us load magazines. "If Morrison finds out, we are all getting written up," he said. Kane clicked a round into place with mechanical precision. "If Morrison finds out and we are still alive to get written up, I will consider it a victory." We worked in silence after that. 3 soldiers defying orders because something deeper than regulation told them it was necessary. Looking back now, I wonder if Chen already knew what was coming. He had been in Fallujah during the second battle, had seen what happened when prepared positions faced determined attackers. Maybe he recognized in Kane the same instinct that had kept him alive when buildings turned into coffins and streets became kill zones. The blizzard arrived exactly when the forecast predicted, rolling down from the mountains like the hand of God reaching down to erase the world. Within 2 hours, visibility dropped to less than 50 feet. The wind howled through the base like a living thing, rattling the metal walls of our shelters and finding every gap in our cold weather gear. Morrison called a meeting in the command tent. Everyone except the perimeter guards crowded in, grateful for the relative warmth and the illusion of shelter. I noticed Specialist Tommy Reeves in the back, our communications tech, taking notes with the kind of careful attention that seemed excessive for a routine weather briefing. But then Reeves was always like that, always documenting, always checking equipment twice. I thought it was thoroughness. Later I would learn it was something else entirely. "We are going to hunker down and ride this out," Morrison said. He had to raise his voice to be heard over the wind. "All non-essential duties are suspended. Perimeter watch will rotate every 2 hours to prevent cold weather injuries." "Questions?" Kane raised her hand. "Sir, I request permission to maintain continuous watch on the North Ridge." Morrison looked at her like she had suggested burning down the base for warmth. "Denied, Sergeant. You will rotate like everyone else. That ridge will still be there when the storm passes." "Sir, if I could explain." "You have explained enough, Kane." Morrison's voice took on an edge. "Your concerns have been noted and dismissed. We are in the middle of a blizzard. No one is attacking through this weather. Now I suggest you get some rest before your watch rotation." Kane stood there for a moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. It might have been resignation. It might have been contempt. Then she saluted and left the tent. I followed her out into the storm. The wind tried to tear the words from my mouth, but I shouted anyway. "What are you going to do?" Kane did not stop walking. "What I always do, Riley. My job." She disappeared into the white curtain of snow, heading toward her position on the ridge. I stood there feeling the cold seep through my layers, watching the place where she had vanished, and tried to tell myself that Morrison was right, that I was being paranoid, that no one would be crazy enough to attack through weather like this. 3 hours later, I was on perimeter watch when I saw the tracks. They were subtle, just depressions in the fresh snow that could have been anything. Wind patterns, drifting, natural settling. But they formed a line too straight to be random, and they led from the tree line toward the base in a path that spoke of purpose and planning. I clicked on my radio. "Kane, this is Riley, you copy?" Static answered me for a heartbeat. Then her voice came through, calm and unsurprised. "Go ahead. North Perimeter, Section 3. I think I have tracks. Thermal signature? Negative. Nothing on thermal." Another pause, then, "Stay there. I am coming to you." She materialized out of the snow like a ghost made solid, her white camouflage making her nearly invisible until she was close enough to touch. She knelt beside me, studying the tracks through her scope. "How old?" I asked. 6 to 8 hours, she said, partially filled by new snow, but the compression patterns are still visible. 4 men moving in a tactical column. They passed within 50 meters of the thermal sensors. "How is that possible?" Kane lowered her scope. "Because they are professionals who understand that thermal imaging has limitations. If you move slow enough, if you mask your heat signature properly, if you know exactly where the sensors are positioned, you can become invisible." My hands were shaking, and it was not from the cold. "We need to tell Morrison." Kane stood up. Her face was hard as carved stone. "You tell Morrison, I'm going to find where they went." Before I could argue, she was gone, moving through the snow with a silence that seemed impossible given the conditions. I stared at the tracks for another moment, then keyed my radio and called it in. Morrison listened to my report with obvious skepticism. He arrived at my position 15 minutes later with Chen and 2 other NCOs. By then, the wind had covered most of the tracks. "I do not see anything," Morrison said, his voice flat. "Sir, they were here, clear as day." "Riley, we have been over this. The thermal arrays are functioning normally. Nothing has approached the perimeter. What you saw was probably caused by wind or animals or a combination of both. Sergeant Kane is tracking them now, sir. She believes it is a reconnaissance element." Morrison's expression darkened. "Kane is supposed to be in the shelter. Where exactly is she?" I pointed north, toward the ridges that were invisible in the storm. "Out there, sir, following the tracks." For a moment, I thought Morrison might have a stroke. His face went from red to purple and back again. When he spoke, his words came out clipped and precise, each one sharp enough to draw blood. "That woman is confined to quarters effective immediately," Morrison said. "When she returns, she will be relieved of duty pending disciplinary action. This cowboy nonsense ends now." Chen cleared his throat. "Sir, if Kane thinks there is a threat..." "There is no threat, Sergeant Chen. There are scared soldiers seeing phantoms in a snowstorm because one paranoid sniper has infected this entire base with her delusions." Morrison turned to me. "You are off watch, Riley. Get to the shelter and stay there." "That is an order." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him about my father's advice, about trusting sergeants over maps, about the tracks that I knew I had seen. But I was a staff sergeant talking to an officer, and the Army has rules about how those conversations go. "Yes, sir," I said. I walked back to the shelter, but I did not stay there. Instead, I grabbed my rifle, loaded it with the magazines Kane and I had cached, and went to find her. It took me an hour of searching through the storm before I found her position. She was prone behind a drift, her scope trained on a section of the perimeter that should have been empty. When I crawled up beside her, she did not seem surprised. "Found 4 distinct entry points," she said without looking at me. "They were inside our sensor perimeter before the storm hit. Been hiding in dead spaces, waiting for conditions to worsen." "How many?" 8 confirmed, possibly 12. Professional kit, coordinated movement. This is not some local militia taking pot shots. I felt my stomach drop. What are they waiting for? Kane adjusted her scope fractionally. For us to relax, for watch rotations to get sloppy, for the storm to peak so that any response will be impossible. She paused. For Morrison to prove that following regulations is more important than staying alive. "We have to warn them." "I already tried." Kane's voice was flat. "Morrison confined me to quarters. He thinks I am seeing things." The wind gusted hard enough to rock us both. Ice crystals stung my face like tiny razors. Somewhere in the dark beyond our position, men who meant to kill us were moving through the storm with patience and precision. "What do we do?" I asked. Kane finally looked at me. Her pale eyes reflected the ambient light from the base, making them seem to glow like a predator's in the dark. We do what soldiers have always done when their officers make the wrong call, she said. We protect our brothers anyway. She pulled out a small notebook, the pages already damp from snow. In the dim light of a shielded flashlight, she showed me a hand-drawn map of Iron Hollow with marks and annotations that turned our base into a battlefield diagram. They will hit 3 points simultaneously, Kane said, her finger tracing attack vectors that made terrible sense once I saw them laid out. Diversionary explosion here at the motor pool to draw our attention. Main assault here on the North Ridge where they already have people in position. Infiltration team here, moving through the gap in our perimeter that Chen has been asking Morrison to fix for 2 months. How do you know? Because it is what I would do. The certainty in her voice was absolute. The kind of knowledge that comes from thinking like your enemy until you can predict their moves before they make them. The storm peaked 2 hours before dawn. The wind reached sustained speeds of 60 miles per hour, with gusts that made standing upright nearly impossible. Temperature dropped to 30 below, visibility reduced to arm's length. It was perfect conditions for an attack. Kane and I had taken positions at key points, moving between them in rotation to create the illusion of more defenders than we actually were. My hands were so cold I could barely feel them, but I kept them moving, kept my rifle ready, kept my eyes searching the white chaos for shapes that did not belong. At 02:47 hours, I heard it. Not an explosion, not yet. Just a sound that was wrong, a mechanical click that cut through the wind noise like a knife through silk. I knew that sound. Every soldier who had been downrange knew that sound. It was the arming switch on a Claymore mine being bypassed. I keyed my radio with fingers that felt like frozen sausages. Kane, they are here. Her voice came back steady as bedrock. I see them, 4 men, North Ridge, moving on the command tent. Riley, sound the alarm, now. I fired 3 shots into the air, the universal signal for contact. The reports cracked through the storm, and for a moment the whole base seemed to hold its breath. Then the motor pool exploded. The explosion lit up the storm like lightning trapped in a bottle. Even from my position 200 meters away, I felt the concussive wave roll through the air, felt it punch into my chest hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. Flames erupted from the motor pool, bright orange against the white curtain of snow. And for a heartbeat, the entire base was illuminated in hellish contrast. In the Landstuhl hospital room, Colonel Marsh leaned forward. His eyes had lost their skeptical edge. Now they held something different, something that looked almost like recognition. The diversionary attack, he said. I nodded, my bandaged hand resting on the table between us, like evidence of sins I could not undo. That was when I understood Kane had been right about everything. The tracks, the timing, the coordination. She had read them like a book written in a language only she could speak. The colonel made a note. What did you do? What any soldier does when the shooting starts, I said. I ran toward the fire. The base erupted into controlled chaos. Men poured from barracks pulling on gear, weapons clutched in hands still clumsy from sleep. The alarm klaxon wailed its mechanical scream into the storm. Somewhere in the command tent, Morrison would be coordinating response, organizing defensive positions, doing all the things that academy training had prepared him for. But Kane had prepared for something different. I found her exactly where she said she would be, prone behind the low wall that marked the northern perimeter. Her rifle was already tracking targets I could not see, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline that must have been flooding her system. When I dropped beside her, she did not look away from her scope. Motor pool is a feint, she said. Her voice carried that preternatural calm of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. Real attack is coming from the North Ridge in approximately 90 seconds. How do you know? Because I have been watching them position for the last hour. She pulled back from her scope and gestured for me to look. Through the falling snow, barely visible in the firelight from the motor pool, I saw them. Shapes moving with purpose up the slope, using the storm and the distraction to mask their approach. They moved in pairs, leapfrogging in a pattern that spoke of professional training and practice coordination. 12 contacts, Kane said. Maybe more behind them. They will hit the north wall first, try to suppress our response, then push infiltrators through while we are focused on the main assault. Where is Morrison? Command tent, coordinating response to the motor pool. Kane's voice held no judgment, just flat statement of fact. He is doing exactly what they want him to do. The first shots came then, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness like camera bulbs at some nightmare event. Rounds cracked past our position, close enough that I heard the supersonic snap of their passage. Kane did not flinch. She settled behind her rifle with the kind of intimacy that comes from 10,000 repetitions and began to work. Her first shot was almost gentle, a soft cough of suppressed discharge that seemed too quiet for the violence it unleashed. Through the scope, I saw one of the advancing shapes drop, suddenly and completely, the way people fall when the string connecting them to life is cut without warning. 11, Kane said. She worked the bolt with mechanical precision, the spent casing ejecting in a perfect arc to land in the snow beside her. Her breathing never changed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, each breath timed to the spaces between heartbeats. Second shot, another shape collapsed. 10. I raised my own rifle, trying to acquire targets through iron sights that were never meant for this kind of engagement. The range was too long, the visibility too poor, the wind too erratic. I fired anyway, long bursts that probably did nothing but waste ammunition and give away our position. But Kane had taught me something in those desperate preparations. Sometimes the point was not to hit, but to force the enemy to acknowledge your presence, to make them hesitate, to buy seconds that could be measured in lives saved. The enemy response was immediate and professional. Suppressive fire raked our position, rounds punching through sandbags and throwing up geysers of snow. I pressed myself flat, feeling the impacts vibrate through frozen earth. Kane shifted slightly, finding a gap in the incoming fire, and took another shot. 9. Riley, she said, her voice cutting through the gunfire with surgical clarity. Fall back to position 2. Create crossfire. I did not argue. You did not argue with Kane when she was working. I low-crawled backward through the snow, feeling it pack into every gap in my gear, soaking through layers until cold reached skin. Position 2 was a fighting hole we had dug 72 hours ago, angled to provide overlapping fields of fire with Kane's primary position. I dropped into it and immediately understood why she had insisted on this exact placement. From here, I could see the entire kill zone, could engage targets that tried to flank Kane's position. The attackers were adapting, splitting into two elements. One team continued the frontal assault, laying down suppressive fire that forced Kane to keep her head down. The second team was moving wide, trying to use the terrain to get around our flank. They did not know about the tripwires. The first man hit one at a full run. The wire was thin, barely visible even in daylight, strung at ankle height exactly where Kane had predicted someone in a hurry would step. The Claymore mine detonated with a flat crack that cut through the storm, sending 700 steel balls through a 60-degree arc. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. 2 men went down, their screams lost in the wind. The assault faltered. I could see them hesitate, see the sudden uncertainty that comes when a plan meets resistance it did not anticipate. That hesitation cost them. Kane took 2 more shots in rapid succession, her timing perfect, catching them in the moment when they were still processing the unexpected. 2 more shapes fell. 7. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio, high and tight with stress. All positions report. What is your status? I keyed my handset. North perimeter under heavy contact. At least 7 enemy KIA, unknown number still in fight. Kane is engaging. There was a pause. When Morrison spoke again, his voice had changed. Something in it had shifted, like a door opening in a locked room. Hold position. Reinforcements inbound. Chen arrived 3 minutes later with 5 soldiers, all of them wide-eyed and breathing hard from the sprint through the storm. He dropped into the fighting hole beside me, his rifle already up and searching for targets. "Where are they?" he shouted over the wind. I pointed toward the ridge. "Kane is keeping them pinned. They are trying to flank, but she predicted their routes." Chen looked at me, and I saw the question in his eyes even before he asked it. How did she know? Because she thinks like them. Another claymore detonated, this one farther east. The distinctive crack is followed by more screams, more chaos in the enemy formation. Kane had not just placed the mines where doctrine suggested. She had placed them where an enemy trying to avoid doctrine's predictable placements would step instead. It was warfare as chess, thinking 3 moves ahead of opponents who thought they were being clever. The enemy commander must have realized his assault was failing because the pattern of fire changed. Instead of trying to advance, they shifted to a fighting withdrawal, laying down covering fire while pulling back toward the ridge. Smart, professional. Exactly what Kane said they would do when the cost became too high. "Let them go!" Kane's voice came over the radio. Her tone was flat, empty of triumph or satisfaction. They have left behind an infiltration team. That was always the real threat. Morrison's voice cut in. Infiltration team? Sergeant Kane explained. While we were focused on the main assault, a smaller team bypassed our perimeter, Kane said. 4 men, possibly 5. They are inside the wire moving toward the command center. How do you know this? Because I have been tracking their approach since before the motor pool exploded. The silence on the radio was profound. Then Morrison spoke, and his voice carried a quality I had never heard from him before. Something that might have been respect, or might have been the first edge of fear. Where are they now? Kane stood up from her position, slinging her rifle across her back and drawing her sidearm in one fluid motion. By now, they should be approximately 50 meters from the command tent. They will try to take you alive, sir. You are more valuable as a hostage than a corpse. All personnel, fall back to the command center, Morrison ordered. Establish a defensive perimeter. Kane, what do you need? Kane was already moving, flowing through the storm like smoke. I need Riley and Chen. Everyone else will just create targets. I followed her into the white darkness, Chen close behind. The world had narrowed to a tunnel of wind and snow, visibility measured in arm lengths. Kane navigated it like she had a map burned into her brain, never hesitating, never slowing. She had walked this base so many times in the past 3 months that she could probably do it blind. We found the first infiltrator near the supplies shed. He was good, I had to give him that. Positioned in shadow, weapon up and tracking the main path to the command tent. He would have killed anyone approaching from the expected directions. But Kane did not approach from expected directions. She came from behind, moving with a silence that seemed impossible given the conditions. I did not see her kill him. I just saw him slump forward, his weapon falling from suddenly nerveless hands. Kane caught it before it could clatter, lowering it and the body to the ground with the same smooth economy of motion. Chen and I reached her position a moment later. She pointed to the body, then gestured for us to check it. The man was young, maybe 25, wearing civilian cold weather gear over body armor. His weapon was a suppressed carbine, expensive and well-maintained. Professional kit for a professional soldier. Chen searched the body quickly, finding nothing but ammunition and a radio set to a frequency we were not monitoring. No identification, no unit patches, no wallet or personal effects that might indicate nationality or affiliation. Ghost, Chen said quietly. Kane nodded. The kind of people who do not exist on paper. The kind who get hired when someone wants plausible deniability. We moved on. The base had become a maze of shadows and half-seen shapes, every sound muffled by wind, every sight obscured by snow. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold, and my hands ached from gripping my rifle too tight. The second infiltrator we found was waiting in ambush, positioned to cover the approach to the command tent. Kane spotted him first, freezing in place and holding up a closed fist. We stopped immediately, melting into cover. She pointed to a position 20 meters to our left, then tapped Chen and gestured for him to circle right. We would set up a crossfire, catch the enemy between us. Chen nodded and began to move, slow and careful as a man defusing a bomb. The enemy soldier was disciplined. He did not move, did not shift, did not do any of the small fidgets that give away a human hiding in wait. But everyone breathes, and breath creates vapor in cold air. Kane watched that vapor, timing its rhythm, calculating the precise moment when inhalation would affect his aim. She fired on an exhale. The suppressed shot was nearly silent, lost in the wind. The enemy soldier jerked once and fell forward, his body making almost no sound as it settled into the snow. 3 down, 2 to go. We found them together, positioned at the entrance to the command tent, in a way that created overlapping fields of fire. Anyone approaching from the front would be caught in a kill box. They were not trying to enter yet, just holding the position, waiting for something. Kane studied them from behind the corner of a storage building. Her eyes moved back and forth, calculating angles and distances and timing. When she spoke, it was barely a whisper. They are waiting for the main assault to resume, she said. Once we are fully committed to the north perimeter, they will breach the tent and extract Morrison. Textbook hostage rescue tactics, except in reverse. Can we take them? I asked. Kane looked at me. Her pale eyes reflected the distant firelight, making them seem to glow. Not without them getting shots off, and not without risking whoever is inside that tent. So what do we do? She smiled then, and it was not a pleasant expression. We change the textbook. Kane handed me her rifle, keeping only her sidearm. She pulled off her white camouflage smock, exposing the standard issue uniform underneath. Then she did something I did not expect. She holstered her weapon and walked out into the open, hands clearly visible at her sides. The two infiltrators spun toward her, weapons rising. They shouted something in a language I did not recognize, commands sharp with authority and threat. Kane stopped walking but did not raise her hands. She spoke in English, her voice carrying clearly despite the wind. Your commander is dead. Your assault team is broken. You are alone and surrounded. Drop your weapons and you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. It was a bluff, of course. We did not know if their commander was dead. We were hardly surrounding them. But Kane delivered it with such absolute conviction that for a moment even I believed her. The infiltrators hesitated. That was their mistake. Chen opened fire from the right flank, his first burst catching one of the soldiers in the side where his armor did not quite overlap. The man went down hard. The second infiltrator spun toward Chen, raising his weapon, and that rotation exposed his back to Kane. She had her pistol out and firing before he completed the turn. 3 shots, center mass, the kind of grouping that speaks to countless hours on the range. The infiltrator stumbled, tried to bring his weapon around, and Kane shot him again. He fell. Silence rushed back in, filled only by wind and the crackling of fires that the storm was slowly extinguishing. Kane walked to each body, checking for signs of life with the detached efficiency of a coroner. Satisfied they were no longer threats, she keyed her radio. Command 10 is secure, she said. 5 enemy KIA inside the perimeter. North Ridge assault has withdrawn. Estimate 7 to 9 KIA from the main element. Morrison emerged from the command tent, his sidearm drawn, his face pale in the firelight. He looked at the bodies, at Kane standing over them, at the carnage that had unfolded while he coordinated responses from behind sandbag walls. Sergeant Kane, he said. His voice was steady, but something in it had fractured. Report. Kane holstered her weapon. Enemy employed a classic 2-pronged assault with diversionary element. Main force of approximately 12 attempted to breach north perimeter. Infiltration team of 5 penetrated inner defenses with objective of capturing or killing command staff. All enemy elements have been neutralized or repelled. Morrison looked at her for a long moment. How did you know? Kane met his gaze without flinching. Because I have been preparing for this since the day I arrived, sir. Because I read the terrain and understood we were bait. Because I refused to trust that regulations written in climate-controlled offices would protect us in a place like this. The lieutenant opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, like each one had to be pulled from somewhere deep and painful. I owe you an apology, Sergeant. Kane shook her head. You owe me nothing, sir. You were following your training. I was following my scars. She walked past him, back toward her position on the North Ridge. I started to follow, but Morrison caught my arm. His grip was tight, almost desperate. Riley, he said, how long has she been preparing for this? Since before you arrived, sir. Since before any of us understood what this place really was. Morrison looked toward the ridge where Kane had disappeared into the storm. And you helped her, even though you knew it was against my orders? I thought about my father, about the stories he told before he got help for the nightmares. I thought about combat engineers who lived because they trusted the sergeants who had seen minefields, not the maps drawn by intelligence officers who had never left the wire. I thought about the difference between regulations and survival. Yes, sir, I said. I helped her. Morrison released my arm. He looked at the bodies again, at the blood already freezing on snow, at the evidence of violence that had come so close to destroying everything he was responsible for. Good, he said quietly. Thank you for that. The storm began to break around 0500 hours. The wind died from a scream to a whisper, and the snow changed from horizontal assault to gentle fall. With the improved visibility came the full accounting of what the night had cost. The motor pool was a total loss. 3 Humvees destroyed, another 2 damaged. PFC Miguel Rodriguez had died in the initial explosion. He was 19 years old, from San Antonio, scheduled to rotate home in 2 months. His family would receive a folded flag and condolences that could never explain why their son had to die in a place they could not pronounce. The fire team that responded to the motor pool had taken casualties. Specialist Maria Gonzalez died from wounds sustained during the fighting withdrawal. Sergeant David Palmer had held a position to cover their retreat and took a round through the throat. He bled out before the medics could reach him. 3 dead, 11 wounded, 2 seriously. The enemy had lost at least 12, possibly more, who withdrew with fatal wounds and died during the retreat through the storm. It could have been so much worse. Morrison called a formation at 0800, once the wounded had been stabilized and the dead respectfully covered. The entire base gathered in the space between the command tent and the ruined motor pool. Exhaustion hung over everyone like a physical weight. Some men were still shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting them in waves. Kane stood apart from the group, her rifle cleaned and ready, her gear squared away as if the night's violence had been nothing more than routine. She did not look tired. She looked like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life, and now that it had passed, she was already watching for the next one. Morrison stood before us, his uniform still showing the mud and blood of the night's work. When he spoke, his voice carried across the formation with clarity that cut through the wind. "Last night we were attacked by a professional enemy force," he said. "They chose conditions designed to blind us, isolate us, and exploit our defensive weaknesses. They should have succeeded." He paused, letting that sink in. "They did not succeed because one soldier refused to accept that our preparations were adequate. One soldier saw what the rest of us missed. One soldier had the courage to disobey orders when those orders would have gotten us all killed." Morrison turned to face Kane directly. Sergeant Sarah Kane, front and center. Kane walked forward, her movements precise and controlled. She stood at attention before Morrison, her pale eyes focused on a point somewhere beyond his shoulder. "Sergeant Kane, for the past 72 hours, you have been in violation of multiple direct orders," Morrison said. His voice carried a formal weight now, the kind of tone used when official record is being made. "You refused to secure your weapon in the armory. You conducted unauthorized defensive preparations. You maintained watch positions during times you were ordered to stand down. You engaged enemy forces before receiving clearance to do so." The entire formation was silent, watching. I felt my stomach clench, knowing where this was going, hating it even though Kane had known the cost from the beginning. Morrison continued, "Under normal circumstances, these violations would result in court-martial and possible dishonorable discharge." Kane's expression did not change. "These are not normal circumstances," Morrison said, "and you, Sergeant Kane, are not a normal soldier. You are the reason 44 men are alive this morning instead of 44 bodies waiting for transport to Dover." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black box. Opening it, he revealed the rank insignia of a staff sergeant. "Effective immediately, you are promoted to staff sergeant," Morrison said. "Furthermore, I am recommending you for the Silver Star for actions above and beyond the call of duty. Your preparations, your tactical acumen, and your refusal to accept inadequate defensive posture directly resulted in the successful defense of this installation." He pinned the new rank on her collar, his hands steady despite everything. When he stepped back, he saluted. The entire formation followed suit, a forest of hands rising in respect. Kane returned the salute, her face still unreadable. But I saw something flicker in her eyes, something that might have been relief or might have been the simple acknowledgement that she had done what she came to do and survived it. "Dismissed," Morrison said. The formation broke up, men returning to the 1,000 tasks that follow combat, clearing weapons, redistributing ammunition, repairing damage, accounting for equipment. Chen found me near the motor pool, surveying the wreckage. "She knew," he said, "not suspected, not guessed, knew." I nodded. Every detail, the timing, the approach vectors, the infiltration routes. She had it mapped out like she had watched them rehearse. Chen was quiet for a moment. In Fallujah, there was a Marine, gunnery sergeant named Cordova. He had this sense, this ability to read a street and know which windows would have shooters, which doorways were rigged, which alleys were clear. We called him the Prophet because he was never wrong. What happened to him? Chen's face went distant. IED got him on his last patrol before rotation. Sometimes the things that keep you alive for 1,000 days do not matter on day 1,001. We stood there in the wreckage, both thinking about prophets and the prices they pay for vision that others do not share. Somewhere across the base, Kane was probably already back at her position, scope trained on ridges that had tried to kill us, watching for the next threat that nobody else could see yet. The radio crackled. "All stations, be advised, quick reaction force is inbound, ETA 20 minutes. Casualties prepare for medevac." I looked at Chen. "We did it. We held." He shook his head slowly. "Riley," Kane held. "We just tried not to die while she worked." That afternoon, while the QRF established a reinforced perimeter and the medevac birds lifted our wounded toward hospitals that could do more than field medicine, Morrison asked to see Kane privately. I was nearby, close enough to hear their conversation through the tent wall. I noticed Specialist Reeves setting up new communications equipment, working with his usual methodical precision, but something about the way he positioned himself made me uneasy. He was close enough to hear, and Reeves always seemed to be close enough to hear important conversations. I need to understand something, Morrison said. How did you know they would attack last night? Kane's voice came back flat, empty of ego. I did not know for certain. I assigned probability based on pattern analysis and tactical logic, but you prepared as if you knew. Sir, I prepare for every possibility. The one time I did not, my spotter died. I will not make that mistake again. There was a long pause. Then Morrison spoke again, and his voice carried a vulnerability I had never heard from an officer addressing enlisted. In the academy, they teach us that leadership means maintaining good order and discipline, Morrison said. They teach us that regulations exist to protect the force, that deviation creates chaos, that officers who bend rules ultimately break units. I understand, sir. No, Morrison said, you do not. What they do not teach us is that sometimes the rule book gets men killed. Sometimes the officer who never bends breaks his people against reality's hard edges. Sometimes paranoia is just another word for preparation when everyone else is too comfortable to see the threat. Kane said nothing. I am 26 years old, Morrison continued. I have an engineering degree from West Point and exactly 0 combat deployments before this one. You are 28. You have 2 combat tours, 17 confirmed kills, and a Silver Star from Mosul that nobody talks about because the citation is still partially classified. Tell me, Sergeant Kane, why would I presume to know better than you what keeps soldiers alive? Because rank says you should, Kane replied. Because the Army is built on hierarchy and chain of command. Because if every sergeant could overrule every lieutenant, we would have chaos instead of order. Morrison laughed, but it was not a happy sound. The chaos happened last night. The order was my neat defensive plan that would have gotten everyone killed if you had not ignored it. Silence again. Then Kane spoke, and there was something different in her voice. Something almost gentle. Sir, you made the decision every good officer makes. You followed your training and tried to do right by your men. That is not weakness. That is exactly what second lieutenants are supposed to do. But it would have failed. Yes, sir, it would have failed. Kane paused. But now you know what failure looks like before it happens. Now you know the difference between regulations that protect and regulations that constrain. That knowledge will keep you alive, and it will keep the men who serve under you alive. Your education just cost 3 lives instead of 47. That is expensive, but it could have been worse. Morrison's voice was barely audible. How do you live with it? Knowing that people died because I did not listen? The same way I live with knowing Davis died because I let him walk 15 feet to pour coffee, Kane said. You carry them. You remember their names. You make sure the next decision is informed by what they taught you at the cost of their lives. And you never, ever convince yourself that you are too smart or too educated or too well-trained to be wrong. What if I am wrong again? Then you will be wrong with your eyes open instead of your head buried in doctrine. That is all any of us can ask for. I heard movement. The sound of Morrison standing up. When he spoke again, his voice had regained some of its command presence. Staff Sergeant Kane, I am reassigning you effective immediately. You will serve as my tactical advisor for all defensive operations. Any concerns you raise regarding base security will be treated as priority 1 directives until proven otherwise. Your judgment on threat assessment will carry the weight of standing orders. Sir, that is highly irregular. Kane, Morrison said, and I heard the smile in his voice despite the weight of the day. Irregular is a woman who sleeps with her rifle and turns out to be the only sane person on a base of 48. I am done pretending that doing things by the book is more important than keeping my people alive. Understood, sir. Kane's voice held something new now, something that might have been approval. One more thing, Morrison said, about the court-martial recommendation. Yes, sir. I am still filing it. I heard Kane shift, confusion in the movement. I am filing it, Morrison continued, and then I am personally testifying that every charge is accurate, that you violated every order I reference, and that I am requesting all charges be dismissed with prejudice because your insubordination directly saved 44 lives, including my own. I want it in your permanent record that you disobeyed orders and were right to do so. I want every officer who reads your file to understand that sometimes the rule book is wrong and the soldier is right. That will not help my career, sir. No, Morrison agreed. But it might save someone else's life someday when an officer reads it and remembers that paranoia kept Iron Hollow from becoming a massacre. They came out of the tent together. Morrison saw me standing there and had the grace to look embarrassed. Riley, how much of that did you hear? Enough to know you are a better officer than you were yesterday, sir. Morrison nodded slowly. We are all better than we were yesterday. We paid for it in blood, but we learned. He looked at Kane. What do you see when you look at those ridges, Sergeant? Kane turned her pale eyes toward the mountains that surrounded us. I see where they came from, and I see where they will come from next time if we do not adapt. Next time, Morrison said flatly. Sir, we killed 12 of them and wounded several more. We destroyed an operation they probably spent weeks planning. They are not going to let that stand. Morrison absorbed this. How long do we have? Kane was quiet for a moment, her gaze tracking along the ridge lines like she was reading a language written in snow and stone. 2 weeks, she said, maybe 3. They will need time to replace casualties, revise tactics, and build new intelligence. But they will come back. Then we have work to do, Morrison said. He turned to me. Riley, spread the word. All hands meeting at 1600 hours. We are redesigning this entire defensive posture from the ground up. Kane will brief her recommendations, and I expect everyone to treat them as gospel until we find a flaw in her logic. And if we find a flaw, sir, I asked, then we better find it before the enemy does, Morrison said. They walked away together, the young officer and the scarred sergeant, heading toward the maps and plans that would turn Iron Hollow from a kill box into a fortress. I watched them go and thought about my father's advice, about trusting the sergeants who had seen combat. Kane had seen more than combat. She had seen the future written in snow patterns and wind vectors, in the spaces between regulations and reality. She had read it like prophecy and made believers of us all. In the hospital room at Landstuhl, I finished my account of that first attack. Colonel Marsh had stopped taking notes. He sat back in his chair, his face showing the kind of tiredness that comes from hearing truth that cannot be easily filed in neat categories. That was the first attack, he said. There were more? 2 more, I confirmed. Each one more sophisticated than the last. Each one defeated because Kane saw it coming. And each time she violated orders? Each time she did what was necessary, I said. Morrison learned to give her the orders that would keep us alive, instead of the orders that would look good in after-action reports. By the end, we were the most tactically effective base in the entire province. Other units requested transfers just to serve under them. Marsh picked up his pen again, clicking it twice. That still does not explain why she is facing court-martial charges now. I looked at him, at this career officer who had probably spent more time in briefing rooms than foxholes, and wondered if he would understand. Because the Army does not know what to do with soldiers like Kane, I said. Because she is proof that sometimes the system is wrong, and admitting that threatens the entire structure. Because keeping her in the field means acknowledging that paranoia and preparation are the same thing when viewed through the lens of survival. That is a cynical view, Riley. Sir, Kane saved my life 4 times over 6 months. The last time she lost 3 fingers doing it. I held up my bandaged hand. The Army wants to prosecute her for the methods she used. I am sitting here with 60% function in my gun hand telling you those methods are the only reason I have any function at all. Marsh was quiet for a long time. Finally, he closed his folder and stood up. Your testimony has been noted, Sergeant Riley. Thank you for your candor. Sir, I said as he moved toward the door. What happens to her? That depends on whether the Army values being right or being alive, Marsh said. And I honestly do not know which one wins anymore. He left me there in that hospital room. Left me with my missing fingers and my living breathing proof that sometimes the madwoman sleeping with her rifle is the only sane person in the room. Outside the window, German rain continued to fall, each drop a second ticking past, each second a space between breathing and bleeding. I thought about Kane wherever she was now, probably holding her rifle even in sleep, probably already counting the seconds until the next threat appeared on a horizon only she could see. Colonel Marsh refilled his coffee cup from the pot that had been sitting too long on the warming plate. The coffee smelled burned, bitter, like regret distilled into liquid form. He did not drink it immediately, just held the cup between his hands and studied the steam rising from its surface. You said there were 2 more attacks, he said. His voice had lost its interrogative edge somewhere in the last hour. Now he just sounded tired. like a man who had heard too many stories about good soldiers dying in bad places. I nodded, my bandaged hand resting on the table between us, like a piece of evidence I could not hide. The second one came 16 days after the first. Kane called it within 48 hours. Marsh sat down again. The chair creaked under his weight, a sound too ordinary for the story we were excavating from memory and pain. Tell me about it. I closed my eyes and I was back there, back in the cold and the dark, in the terrible certainty that we were all going to die. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like water finding its level. After the first attack, Iron Hollow changed. Morrison changed. We all changed. The base became a laboratory for Kane's particular brand of tactical paranoia. She walked every meter of the perimeter at different times of day, in different weather conditions, mapping sight lines and dead zones with the precision of a surgeon charting blood vessels. She tested our response times, woke us at random hours with simulated alerts, made us rehearse casualty evacuation procedures until we could do them blind and half asleep. The men stopped calling her the madwoman. Now they called her the prophet, and there was respect in it, the kind of respect soldiers reserve for the people who keep them breathing. Morrison became her disciple. Every defensive recommendation she made, he implemented. Every concern she raised, he treated as gospel until proven otherwise. They would spend hours in the command tent, Kane pointing to maps and Morrison taking notes like a student who knew the final exam would be written in blood. Chen told me once that watching them work was like watching a married couple who had survived something terrible together. They communicated in shorthand, in glances, and half-finished sentences that carried more meaning than full paragraphs. Kane would say perimeter and Morrison would already be nodding, reaching for the radio to redirect patrols. But there was tension too, the kind that comes from waiting for a storm you know is coming but cannot see yet. Kane was certain they would return. Morrison believed her. The rest of us lived in the space between faith and fear, waiting for prophecy to become reality. Specialist Tommy Reeves was our communications specialist. Good kid, 22 years old, from somewhere in Tennessee where accents ran thick as molasses. He had been with us since before the first attack, quiet and competent, the kind of soldier who did his job without drama or complaint. He maintained our radio equipment, managed our frequency rotations, and kept our communications secure. What we did not know was that Reeves had also been keeping detailed notes on our defensive preparations, maps with patrol routes, schedules for watch rotations, diagrams of our new Claymore positions, technical specifications for our thermal imaging arrays and their blind spots. He documented everything with the thoroughness of a man who understood that information has value, especially to people willing to pay for it. Kane noticed small things, Reeves asking questions that seemed innocent, but probed deeper than necessary. The way he positioned himself during briefings to hear conversations not meant for his ears. How he always volunteered for communications duty during security meetings, always present when tactical decisions were being made. She mentioned it to Morrison once. Something about Reeves feels wrong, she had said, too curious, too helpful. Morrison had dismissed it. Riley, everyone here is curious about security after what happened. Reeves is doing his job, that is all. But Kane's instincts rarely lied. She just could not prove what she felt, could not articulate the pattern she saw forming from 1,000 small observations that added up to suspicion without evidence. The second attack came on a Tuesday, 16 days after the first, at 02:43 hours, when human circadian rhythms are at their lowest ebb and reaction times stretch like taffy. Kane had predicted it would come between days 14 and 20, during a new moon phase when ambient light would be minimal. She had been preparing us for 2 weeks, running drills that left us exhausted and sharp, resentful and grateful in equal measure. I was on perimeter watch, North Sector, the same position where I had first seen the tracks that Kane confirmed were enemy scouts. The night was cold enough to make breathing painful, clear enough to see stars scattered across the sky like broken glass on black velvet. Beautiful, if you did not know what beauty could hide. Kane was in her primary position, the sniper hide on the north ridge that gave her overlapping fields of fire across the most likely approach vectors. Morrison had tried to convince her to rotate, to share watch duty with other designated marksmen. She refused with the kind of quiet certainty that did not invite argument. Sir, she had said, if they come when I am not watching, we die. It is that simple. Morrison had let it stand. At 0237 hours, 6 minutes before the attack, Kane's voice came over the radio, low and urgent, and carrying that particular quality that made experienced soldiers stop whatever they were doing and listen. All stations, this is Overwatch. Movement on the North Ridge, multiple contacts, estimated 8 to 12 personnel. They are using the dead ground we identified in Sector 7. Morrison's response was immediate. All positions, weapons tight, confirm rules of engagement. I clicked my radio twice, acknowledgement without words. Around the perimeter, other soldiers did the same. We had rehearsed this so many times that the response was automatic, muscle memory encoded through repetition until thought became unnecessary. Overwatch, this is command, Morrison said. Can you confirm hostile intent? There was a pause. In that pause, I heard Kane breathing, heard the careful, measured rhythm of someone making calculations that would determine if men lived or died. When she spoke again, her words carried weight that pressed down like atmospheric pressure before a tornado. Negative visual confirmation of weapons, she said, but movement pattern is tactical. Spacing is military. They are using cover and concealment in a way that indicates hostile intent. Request permission to engage. Another pause. Morrison knew now that Kane's judgment was born from scars that regulations could not teach. But he was also an officer, responsible for rules of engagement that prevented friendly fire in international incidents. Overwatch, hold fire until we have positive identification, Morrison said. All stations, increase alert posture. Be ready to engage on my command. I heard something in Kane's silence, a quality of resignation that spoke volumes. She understood the decision. She disagreed with it. She would follow orders because that was what soldiers did, even when those orders might kill them. 60 seconds passed. I counted them, each one stretching like wire pulled taut. At second 47, the North Ridge erupted in muzzle flashes. The enemy had learned from the first attack. No diversionary explosion this time. No frontal assault that would trigger our prepared defenses. Instead, they opened with a coordinated barrage of rifle grenades that arced through the darkness, trailing sparks like falling stars. The grenades impacted across our defensive positions with mathematical precision, each one placed to suppress a specific sector of fire. One landed 3 meters from my position. I had exactly enough time to register the metallic clink of its impact before training took over, and I was moving, getting distance between myself and the point of detonation. The explosion caught me anyway, the overpressure wave picking me up and throwing me against a sandbag wall, hard enough to crack ribs I would not know were broken until hours later. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. I could see my rifle lying 2 meters away, could see my own blood on the snow, bright red against white like paint splashed on canvas. I crawled toward the weapon, every movement sending lightning bolts of pain through my chest. Kane's rifle spoke once, twice, 3 times. The suppressed shots were barely audible over the ringing in my ears, but I knew that sound, had heard it enough to recognize it even through damage and distance. Each shot meant one less enemy. Each shot was Kane doing what she did best. I reached my rifle, brought it up, tried to find targets through vision that kept wanting to gray out at the edges. The enemy was advancing in fire teams, leapfrogging forward while support elements provided covering fire. Professional, coordinated, better than the first attack. Much better. They hit our weakest points simultaneously. Sectors where overlapping fields of fire had small gaps, angles that required defenders to expose themselves to engage. Kane had identified these vulnerabilities, had recommended relocating positions to eliminate them. But there were only so many soldiers and so much perimeter to cover. Some gaps could not be closed without creating others. The enemy knew our gaps, knew them with the kind of precision that came from detailed intelligence, from someone who had walked our defenses and mapped our weaknesses with intimate knowledge. Someone inside had told them where to strike. Chen's position took a direct hit from a rifle grenade that turned his fighting hole into a crater. I saw him thrown clear, saw him land in a sprawl of limbs that did not move. 3 soldiers rushed to pull him back, dragging him toward cover while enemy fire kicked up snow around their boots. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos, command presence overriding fear. Fall back to secondary positions. Fighting withdrawal by teams. Overwatch, we need suppression on the North Ridge. Already working, Kane replied. Her voice was calm, flat, empty of everything except focus. Recommend immediate counterattack on east flank. They are massing for a push. Execute, Morrison said. He trusted her now, trusted her completely, had learned that Kane's tactical sense was worth more than any academy education. I made it to my feet, ribs screaming protest, and fell back with my fire team toward the secondary defensive line. We moved in pairs, one element covering while the other bounded back, textbook movement that felt clumsy and slow compared to the enemy's fluid advance. Kane was everywhere and nowhere, her shots coming from angles that should have been impossible. She was using every position we had prepared, every hide site and fallback location, moving between them with speed that defied the terrain in the darkness. Each time the enemy thought they had her location pinned, she was already somewhere else, already firing from a different vector. But even Kane could not be in two places at once. The enemy pressure was relentless, coordinated, designed to overwhelm through sheer volume of fire and aggression. They were winning meter by meter, pushing us back toward the center of the base where our room to maneuver would collapse into nothing. That was when the mortars started falling. The first round landed in the motor pool, the same location they had hit during the first attack. But this was not a diversionary explosion. This was precision indirect fire, walking rounds across our defensive positions with the kind of accuracy that required a forward observer who knew exactly where we were. The second round hit the communications bunker. I watched it arc down from the sky, watched the bunker disappear in a flash of light and pressure that turned sandbags into projectiles and equipment into shrapnel. Specialist Reeves had been inside, had been coordinating our defensive communications, routing traffic between positions, and calling for quick reaction force support. Or so we thought. The bunker collapsed inward, burying everything under tons of earth and concrete, and the wreckage of sophisticated electronics that had cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. If Reeves had actually been inside, he would have died instantly. But he was not inside. Kane saw it before anyone else. I heard her voice over the radio, the command frequency that was still working even though our tactical net had gone silent. They have a spotter inside our perimeter, she said. Someone is giving them our positions in real time. Morrison's response was immediate. All personnel, assume you are being observed. Weapons free, engage any unauthorized personnel on site. It was the right call, but it came too late. The enemy infiltration team was already inside our wire, had been inside for who knows how long, waiting for the moment when confusion would give them freedom to move. They hit the ammunition depot 30 seconds after the communications bunker went down. The explosion was catastrophic, a fireball that rose into the night sky like a miniature sun being born from chaos and violence. Secondary explosions followed as stored munitions cooked off, each detonation sending shockwaves that rattled teeth and stopped hearts. I was thrown flat again, ears ringing worse now, blood running from my nose in streams that froze on my face. Around me, the base was burning, the careful defensive preparations of 2 weeks reduced to rubble and bodies and the kind of destruction that looked like the end of everything. Through the smoke and fire, I saw Kane moving, still fighting, still working. She had abandoned her rifle for her sidearm and a captured enemy carbine, was engaging targets at close range with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had crossed a threshold where fear no longer registered. Her face was streaked with blood and soot, her movements sharp and decisive, every shot placed with the kind of precision that spoke to countless hours of training. She was magnificent and terrible, a force of nature wearing human skin, death given form and purpose, and an M4 carbine taken from an enemy who no longer needed it. Morrison rallied what remained of our forces at the command tent, 23 soldiers out of the 48 who had been at Iron Hollow when the attack began. The rest were dead, wounded, or cut off by fire too heavy to cross. We formed a perimeter, a circular defense that shrank with every passing minute, surrounded by an enemy who had numbers and initiative and someone inside feeding them intelligence. Kane appeared out of the smoke like a ghost materializing from memory. She dropped beside Morrison, checked her ammunition, reloaded with practiced economy of motion. Her pale eyes swept the perimeter, calculating angles and distances in the 100 small details that separated survival from slaughter. They are going to try to overrun us, she said. No more tactical movement, just mass and violence. How long do we have? 3 minutes, Kane said, maybe 4. Then they commit their reserve element, and it is over. Morrison looked at her, at this woman who had predicted everything, who had tried to prepare us for everything, who had been proven right again and again until being right became a curse instead of a gift. What do you recommend? Break out, Kane said. Draw 'em. Small teams, multiple vectors, rendezvous at Rally Point Charlie. Force them to split their attention. Morrison shook his head. We have wounded. We cannot move them fast enough. Then we die here, Kane said. There was no emotion in her voice, just flat statement of tactical reality. No, Morrison said. You break out, take Riley and 6 others, get to Charlie and call for fire support. We will hold here and give you time. Kane looked at him for a long moment. Sir, you know what happens if you stay. Yes, Morrison said, I know. But I also know that someone needs to survive this to explain how it happened. Someone needs to make sure the people who died here are not forgotten. He paused. Someone needs to testify at the court-martial. Kane smiled then, and it was the saddest thing I had ever seen. Sir, if I survive this, there will not be a court-martial. There will be a medal ceremony where they pin metal on my chest and tell me I did everything right. Then they will assign me somewhere quiet where my particular brand of paranoia cannot embarrass anyone. Morrison gripped her shoulder. Then make sure the medal is worth it. Keep Riley alive. He is going to need to tell this story. I started to protest, but Kane was already moving, already selecting soldiers and issuing orders in the kind of tone that did not invite discussion. Chen was among the chosen, unconscious, and being carried by 2 soldiers who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else in the world. 6 others, all wounded, all barely mobile. We moved out at 03:12 hours, 30 minutes after the attack began. Behind us, Morrison and the remaining defenders opened fire, drawing enemy attention while we slipped through a gap in their lines that Kane had identified. She led us through terrain that should have been impassable, through gullies and dead ground and spaces too small for the enemy to expect. But someone was watching, someone who knew our escape routes and rally points in the careful plans Kane had made for every contingency. The ambush hit us 200 meters from the command tent. Enemy fire came from 3 sides. A perfect L-shaped ambush that caught us in a kill zone designed by someone who understood how we thought. Soldiers fell, bodies dropping into snow that was already stained red from earlier fighting. Kane reacted instantly, laying down suppressive fire and screaming for us to move, to run, to do anything except die, standing still like targets on a range. I grabbed Chen's unconscious form, started dragging him toward cover, felt rounds snapping past close enough to feel their passage through air. Then I saw him, Reeves. He was not buried under the communications bunker. He was standing on a small rise 50 meters away, radio in hand, speaking calmly while the world burned around him. Speaking to someone who was not us, coordinating in a language that might have been Russian or might have been something else, pointing and gesturing and guiding fire onto positions where he knew we would be. His Tennessee accent was gone, replaced by something else, something that sounded Eastern European and cultured and completely foreign to the good old boy persona he had worn for 6 months. The transformation was complete, chilling in its implications. Everything about him had been a lie. Traitor, I screamed. The word came out raw, torn from somewhere deep in my chest where rage and betrayal mixed into something that felt like acid burning through tissue. Reeves saw me see him. For a moment, our eyes locked across distance and darkness. Then he smiled, just a small curve of lips that held no warmth, and raised his rifle toward where I stood exposed and stupid and frozen by the simple fact of his betrayal. Kane shot him before he could fire. The round took him high in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him into snow that would be his grave. She did not pause to confirm the kill, was already moving, already firing at the enemy positions that Reeves had been directing. But the damage was done. The enemy knew where we were going, knew every move we might make because Reeves had spent 2 weeks mapping our defensive plans and passing them along to whoever paid him better than the army did. Move, Kane shouted. She was firing controlled pairs, dropping enemies with mechanical efficiency, but there were too many and we were too exposed. Rally Point Charlie is compromised. We go west into the valley. West was bad terrain, broken ground with poor sight lines and nowhere to establish defensive positions. West was where we would die slowly instead of quickly. But West was also unexpected, and unexpected meant maybe, possibly, perhaps we could survive. We ran. Those of us who could still run carried those who could not. Chen was a dead weight across my shoulders, his blood soaking through my uniform. warm against skin that was freezing in air that had dropped to 20 below. My ribs ground against each other with every step, sending pain signals that my brain was too flooded with adrenaline to properly process. Behind us, the fighting continued. Morrison and his remaining defenders selling their lives for seconds that might give us distance. I heard him on the radio, heard his voice steady despite everything, calling adjustments and encouraging his men and doing all the things good officers do when they know they are going to die. Staff Sergeant Kane, Morrison said. His voice was formal, carrying the weight of last words. It has been an honor serving with you. Kane did not slow, did not stop, but I saw something flicker across her face, something that might have been grief, or might have been rage, or might have been the simple acknowledgement that good men were dying because she had not prepared them well enough. Sir, she said, and her voice cracked just slightly on the word. The honor was mine. Then the radio went dead, not in a burst of static, but in simple silence that was somehow worse. Morrison was gone. 22 soldiers were gone. Iron Hollow was gone. Everything we had built and prepared and fought for was burning behind us while we ran into darkness that offered no promises except continued survival. We made it another kilometer before they caught us again. This time there was no ambush, just a running firefight through terrain that tried to kill us as efficiently as the enemy. We lost 2 more soldiers in the first exchange, cut down by fire that came from angles we could not defend against. Kane fought like something that had transcended human limits, moving and shooting and directing our retreat with the kind of tactical brilliance that should have been impossible under the circumstances. She was everywhere, covering our movement, laying down fire, calling adjustments, keeping us alive through nothing but will and skill, and the refusal to accept that we were beaten. But even Kane had limits. Even prophets bleed. It happened at 03:47 hours, 34 minutes into our running retreat. We were crossing an open space, unavoidable exposure that Kane tried to minimize by timing our movement between enemy fire. I was halfway across, still carrying Chen, when I heard the distinctive crack of a rifle shot that had my name on it. The round would have taken me through the base of the skull, angled down through my spine, would have killed me so fast I would not have known I was dead. But Kane was faster than physics, faster than bullets, faster than the 3 seconds it takes for a man to realize he has made a fatal mistake. She hit me from the side, a full-body tackle that drove me into snow hard enough to crack something in my shoulder. The round that should have killed me took her instead, entering her left hand and exiting through her palm after destroying 3 fingers and most of the bones that gave that hand shape and function. She made no sound, just rolled and came up firing one-handed, putting rounds down range with her sidearm while her ruined hand hung limp and bleeding. The enemy marksman who had nearly killed me took one of her rounds through the center of his scope, the kind of shot that should have been impossible for someone shooting one-handed with adrenaline and pain flooding their system. But Kane did not miss, not when it mattered, not when lives hung in the balance of 3 seconds between breathing and bleeding. "Keep moving," she said through grated teeth. Her face was pale, shock starting to set in, blood running down her arm in streams that froze before they could drip. Rally Point Delta, go now. I tried to argue, but she was already tourniqueting her own arm, already preparing to provide cover while we ran. Chen was still unconscious across my shoulders, still bleeding from wounds I could not treat while moving. The other 4 survivors were clustered around me, eyes wide with shock and fear, and the terrible knowledge that we were running out of places to run. Kane held them for 6 minutes. 6 minutes of methodical, precise, devastating fire that dropped 11 enemy soldiers and convinced the rest that pursuing us through killing ground was more costly than letting us escape. 6 minutes bought with pain and blood and a hand that would never work properly again. When she caught up to us at Rally Point Delta, her face was gray with shock, and she was shaking despite the adrenaline that should have been keeping her warm. I tried to help her, tried to do something about the bleeding that had soaked through her tourniquet, but she waved me off with her good hand. "Chen first," she said. "He is worse than me." Chen was worse than everyone. The rifle grenade that had blown apart his fighting hole had filled his torso with shrapnel, any piece of which could have severed something vital. I did what I could with the medical supplies we had, plugged holes and wrapped bandages, and prayed to gods I did not believe in that quick reaction force would arrive before he bled out. Kane sat against a rock, her ruined hand cradled against her chest, her pale eyes tracking the approaches we would need to defend if the enemy came again. She had switched to her sidearm, loaded a fresh magazine, one-handed with practiced efficiency that spoke to training most people never received. We held Delta for 2 hours. The enemy probed our perimeter 3 times but never committed to a full assault. Maybe they had taken too many casualties. Maybe they had achieved their objective by destroying Iron Hollow. Maybe they just decided we were not worth the cost. Or maybe they knew we were finished anyway, that dawn would reveal us exposed and isolated and easy to destroy. Quick reaction force arrived at 0612 hours, helicopters thundering in with door guns blazing and soldiers fast roping into positions around our tiny perimeter. The cavalry arriving just in time, the way they do in movies and sometimes, if you are very lucky, in real life. They medevac Chen first, then the other wounded. Kane refused to leave until every other soldier was aboard, stood there in the rotor wash with blood freezing on her uniform and eyes that tracked threats no one else could see. When they finally loaded her onto the last helicopter, she looked back at Iron Hollow, at the smoke rising from its ruins, at the place where good soldiers had died following orders that should have kept them safe. The pilot asked her something I could not hear over the engine noise. She leaned close to his ear and spoke. Whatever she said made him nod and banked the helicopter in a slow circle around the base. From the air, you could see the full extent of the destruction. Buildings reduced to craters, defensive positions obliterated, bodies scattered like seeds thrown by careless hands. Morrison's final stand had ended at the command tent, his body and the bodies of his soldiers forming a ring around an objective they had defended to the last man. Kane watched it all with eyes that had seen too much and would never unsee any of it. Then she turned away, faced forward, and began the long journey toward hospitals and investigations, and the question of how you punish someone for being right when being right costs lives, you cannot measure in after-action reports. In the Landstuhl hospital room, Colonel Marsh had stopped pretending to take notes. He sat with his hands folded on the table, his face showing the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying other people's trauma. How many survived? He asked quietly. Out of 48 soldiers at Iron Hollow when the second attack began, I said 7 made it out. Chen died 3 days later from complications. That left 6. 6 out of 48, sir, 12% survival rate. And Kane saved all of you. Kane saved everyone she could, I said. She predicted the attack. She prepared us as well as anyone could have. She broke us out when staying meant death. She took a bullet meant for me and killed the shooter with her offhand while going into shock. Marsh was quiet for a long moment. Then why is she facing court-martial? Because she violated 73 separate regulations doing it, I said. Because she disobeyed direct orders. Because she killed Specialist Reeves without confirming his hostile intent through proper channels. Because the Army needs someone to blame, and blaming Kane is easier than admitting our defensive posture was inadequate and our vetting procedures let a traitor slip through. That is not how military justice works, Riley. I looked at him, at this career officer who probably believed what he was saying. Sir, with respect, Kane saved my life 4 times. The last time cost her 3 fingers and any chance of continuing as a sniper. She is the best soldier I have ever served with, and she is being court-martialed because the truth of what happened at Iron Hollow is too embarrassing for the Army to acknowledge. The truth being, that paranoia kept us alive, and regulations would have killed us all. That Kane saw threats no one else believed existed. That she was right and everyone who doubted her paid for that doubt in blood. Marsh stood up slowly, like gravity had increased while we talked. Sergeant Riley, your testimony will be included in the full investigation. Whether it changes the outcome, I cannot say. Sir, what happens if they convict her? Then we lose the one soldier who might have prevented the next Iron Hollow, Marsh said. And somewhere, sometime soon, good men will die because the person who could have saved them got court-martialed for saving people last time. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. For what it is worth, Riley, I believe you. I believe her. I just do not know if belief is enough to overcome the weight of regulations and the need to assign blame. He left me there in that hospital room with my bandaged hand and my survivor's guilt and the knowledge that Kane was somewhere fighting a different kind of battle. One without bullets, but with stakes just as high. I closed my eyes and saw her face. Saw those pale gray eyes that had seen the future written in snow and shadows. Saw the small smile she wore when 3 seconds was all that stood between soldiers and slaughter. Saw the quiet certainty that some things were worth breaking rules for. Somewhere a clock ticked. Each second a heartbeat. Each heartbeat 3 seconds from breathing or bleeding. Kane had taught us to count those seconds, had taught us that survival was measured in the space between regulation and reality, between what doctrine said was right and what combat proved was necessary. The Army wanted to court-martial her for that knowledge. I just hoped someone somewhere would be smart enough to listen to what she had learned, written in scars and blood, and the names of 42 soldiers who did not make it home. 3 seconds. That was all it ever took. 3 seconds to decide between life and death, between following orders and staying alive, between being a good soldier and being a breathing one. Kane had chosen breath, had chosen life, had chosen us over regulations and paid for it in fingers she could not grow back, and nights she would never sleep through without seeing Morrison's last stand playing behind her eyelids. I hoped it was worth it. I hoped we were worth it. I hoped that someday, somewhere, another soldier would read about Kane and learn that sometimes the madwoman sleeping with her rifle is the only sane person in the room. 3 seconds, count them carefully. They might be all you have. 3 weeks after Iron Hollow burned, I sat in a different room with a different set of questions. This time the walls were government beige instead of hospital white, and the man across from me wore dress blues instead of a doctor's coat. Major General Thomas Bradford had the kind of face that photographs well for promotion boards, all sharp angles and controlled expressions that gave away nothing. The Article 32 hearing would determine whether Staff Sergeant Sarah Kane faced a full court-martial or whether the charges would be dismissed. Bradford chaired the investigating board. 2 lieutenant colonels flanked him, their nameplates reading Chen and Morrison. Not our Chen, not our Morrison, just men who happened to share names with ghosts. The irony was not lost on me. Sergeant Riley, Bradford said, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of a man who had conducted 100 such hearings. You have submitted written testimony regarding the events at Forward Operating Base Iron Hollow. The board has reviewed your statement. We would like to hear, in your own words, your assessment of Staff Sergeant Kane's actions. I looked down at my bandaged hand. The surgeons had done what they could, but I would never play guitar again, never write with the same fluidity, never shake hands without people noticing the way my fingers did not quite close properly. Small prices for being alive, they told me, as if life could be measured in percentages of function. Sir, I began, and found my voice steadier than I expected. Staff Sergeant Kane is the reason 6 men are alive to testify at this hearing instead of being carried off medevac birds in body bags. Everything she did, every order she violated, every regulation she broke, she did because she understood something the rest of us refused to see, which was that Iron Hollow was designed to fail, that our defensive posture was inadequate, that regulations written for garrison peacetime operations do not account for an enemy who studies your weaknesses and exploits them with professional precision. Bradford made a note. The charges against Sergeant Kane include 73 separate violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice: insubordination, unauthorized defensive preparations, failure to follow proper escalation of force procedures, and most seriously, the killing of Specialist Thomas Reeves without confirming hostile intent through proper channels. I felt heat rise in my chest, the kind that comes from rage held too long under pressure. Sir, with respect, Specialist Reeves was a foreign intelligence operative who spent 6 months mapping our defenses and passing them to an enemy force. He coordinated the attack that killed Lieutenant Morrison and 22 other soldiers. Staff Sergeant Kane shot him while he was actively directing fire onto our position. If that does not constitute hostile intent, then the term has no meaning. The enemy claimed Reeves' body during their withdrawal, one of the colonels said. We have no physical evidence to support the assertion that he was anything other than what his service record indicates. We have the radio he was carrying, I said, the one broadcasting on a frequency that matched enemy communications. We have the maps found in his quarters showing our defensive positions with details only someone inside could know. We have the forensic analysis of the communications bunker showing he was not inside when it was hit, despite being assigned there. And we have my testimony and the testimony of 5 other survivors, all of whom saw him coordinating with the enemy. Bradford leaned back. Your testimony is noted, Sergeant. However, we must also consider that you had a close working relationship with Kane, that you participated in unauthorized defensive preparations, that you may have a vested interest in defending her actions regardless of their legality. Sir, I said, and something in my voice made Bradford's eyes sharpen. I have a vested interest in being alive. Kane gave me that. She gave it to 5 other men. She tried to give it to 42 more, but the system would not let her. Explain that statement. I took a breath and told them what I had been rehearsing for 3 weeks. The speech that had formed itself in the spaces between nightmares and morphine dreams. Lieutenant Morrison was a good officer. He followed his training. He maintained standards. He did everything the academy taught him to do. And he would have gotten every one of us killed if Kane had not defied him. Not because he was incompetent, but because the playbook we gave him assumed an enemy that follows the same rules we do. The enemy at Iron Hollow did not follow rules. They used weather as a weapon. They infiltrated our perimeter days before the attack and waited with patience that doctrine says they should not have. They placed a spy inside our organization, and we did not catch him because our vetting procedures assume that American accents and clean service records equal loyalty. Kane saw all of this. She told Lieutenant Morrison. She showed him the patterns, the gaps, the vulnerabilities. And he dismissed her because she was breaking protocol to point them out. The system punished Kane for being right and rewarded Morrison for following orders that were wrong. Morrison died a hero, Bradford said quietly. He and his men held their position to give you time to escape. Yes, sir, I agreed. He did. And before he died, he learned. He trusted Kane. He gave her authority to redesign our defenses. And that trust bought us enough time to hold through the first attack and enough warning to escape the second. Morrison's last words to Kane were that it had been an honor serving with her. The room was quiet. Somewhere outside, soldiers marched in formation, their cadence calls filtering through windows that did not open. Normal operations continuing while we debated whether saving lives was a crime. The second colonel spoke. Sergeant Riley, you claim Kane shot Specialist Reeves in defense of your position. Yet the forensic evidence suggests the shot was taken at a range of 50 meters while Reeves was not actively firing. That could constitute preemptive use of lethal force. I looked at him, and this man who had probably never had someone he trusted turn out to be a traitor, who had never seen a friendly face give coordinates to people trying to kill you. Sir, Reeves was raising his rifle toward my position when Kane shot him. I was carrying Sergeant Chen at the time. I was exposed. I was defenseless. Reeves smiled before he aimed. He smiled because he knew he had us. Kane's shot was not preemptive. It was exactly on time. The colonel made a note, but his expression had shifted, something human showing through the military bearing. Bradford shuffled papers. This board has also reviewed testimony from the 5 other survivors. All corroborate your account. All speak highly of Staff Sergeant Kane's tactical acumen and leadership under fire. However, that does not change the fact that she violated direct orders on multiple occasions. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. I leaned forward, ignoring the protests from ribs that were still healing. Sir, every regulation Kane violated was written by someone who assumed perfect information and rational actors. They assume the enemy will attack when we expect, from directions we anticipate, using methods we are prepared for. They assume our intelligence is accurate and our personnel are vetted properly. Iron Hollow proved every one of those assumptions wrong. Kane understood that. She prepared for reality instead of doctrine. And when reality arrived with rifle grenades and mortar fire and a traitor calling in our positions, her paranoia was the only thing standing between survival and massacre. If you court-martial her for that, you are telling every soldier in this army that being right matters less than being compliant. You are telling them that protecting their people is less important than protecting the chain of command. And you are guaranteeing that the next Iron Hollow will have a 100% casualty rate because the soldier who could have saved them will be too afraid to break the rules. Bradford was silent for a long moment. Then he closed the folder in front of him. Thank you for your testimony, Sergeant Riley. This board will take your statement under advisement. You are dismissed. I stood, saluted, and walked out of that room on legs that still remembered running through snow while good men died behind me. 2 days later, I was summoned again. Same room, same board. But this time Kane was there, standing at attention in dress uniform, with her ruined left hand held stiffly at her side. The surgeons had saved 2 fingers. The other 3 were gone, along with most of the hand's fine motor control. She did not look at me as I entered. Her pale eyes were fixed on a point somewhere beyond Bradford's shoulder, her face as unreadable as it had been on that ridge when she counted seconds between heartbeats. Staff Sergeant Sarah Kane, Bradford said. This board has completed its investigation into the events at Forward Operating Base Iron Hollow. We have reviewed all testimony, examined all evidence, and considered all factors relevant to the charges against you. Kane's expression did not change. The charges, Bradford continued, are accurate. You did violate direct orders. You did conduct unauthorized defensive preparations. You did engage enemy personnel without following the proper escalation procedures, and you did shoot Specialist Thomas Reeves without confirmation of hostile intent through approved channels. I felt my chest tighten. They were going to do it. They were going to throw away the best soldier I had ever served with because she refused to let doctrine kill her people. However, Bradford said, and something in his tone made me look up. This board finds that every violation occurred in the context of defending United States forces from an imminent and overwhelming threat. That your actions, while technically illegal, were tactically sound and operationally necessary. That your judgment, though in conflict with regulations, was proven correct by subsequent events. He paused, and I saw something flicker across his face. Something that might have been respect, or might have been the acknowledgement that he was about to do something irregular. Furthermore, this board finds that the charge of improperly killing Specialist Reeves is without merit. Forensic analysis has confirmed that Reeves was indeed carrying communications equipment broadcasting on enemy frequencies. That his personal effects included detailed maps of base defenses, that he was not present in the communications bunker when ordered, and that multiple witnesses place him in the act of coordinating with enemy forces at the time of his death. Bradford looked directly at Kane now. Staff Sergeant Kane, the intelligence failure that allowed a foreign operative to infiltrate our organization is not your responsibility. The defensive inadequacies at Iron Hollow are not your fault. The deaths of Lieutenant Morrison and his men are not on your conscience. You did everything a soldier could do and more than regulations allowed. You saved 6 lives at the cost of 3 fingers and a career in the field you loved. He stood, and the 2 colonels followed suit. I found myself standing as well, though I did not remember deciding to. All charges are dismissed, Bradford said. Furthermore, this board recommends your immediate promotion to Sergeant First Class and award of the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. You will be reassigned to the Special Operations Target Interdiction course at Fort Benning as a senior instructor. Your experience and tactical expertise will be used to train the next generation of Army snipers. Kane blinked. It was the first crack I had seen in her composure since entering the room. Sir, I said, addressing Bradford, permission to speak? Go ahead, Sergeant Riley. The Distinguished Service Cross is the 2nd highest award for valor, just below the Medal of Honor. Is the board certain that is the appropriate recognition? Bradford's expression hardened. Sergeant Riley, Staff Sergeant Kane predicted 2 attacks with near-perfect accuracy. She prepared defenses that allowed you to survive the first and escape the second. She personally eliminated 18 enemy combatants. She identified a traitor that our intelligence services missed. She saved your life by taking a bullet meant for you and then killed the shooter one-handed while going into shock. Yes, Sergeant, I am certain. He turned back to Kane. Do you have anything to say, Sergeant Kane? Kane was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the same flat tone she used when calculating wind drift and bullet drop. Sir, the men who died at Iron Hollow were better soldiers than I am. They followed orders. They trusted the system. They did their jobs. If I am receiving recognition for surviving while they are receiving folded flags, then something is wrong with how we measure service. Bradford nodded slowly. You are probably right, Sergeant. But the Army does not award medals for following orders. It awards them for results. Your result was 6 soldiers who get to go home. That is worth recognizing. Kane came to attention. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. You are dismissed, both of you. We walked out together, Kane and I, into a hallway that smelled of floor wax and old coffee. She stopped at a window that looked out over the parade ground, where formations moved in geometric precision. They are making you a teacher, I said. Kane nodded. Apparently, my particular brand of paranoia is valuable when delivered in a classroom instead of a forward operating base. You saved us. She looked at me then, those pale eyes holding weight that words could not carry. I saved 6, Riley. I lost 42. Do not ask me to feel proud of those numbers. Morrison would tell you that 48 for 48 was never possible, that you gave us the best chance we could have had. Morrison is dead because I did not see Reeves coming soon enough. Nobody saw Reeves coming, I said. That is why he was good at his job. Kane turned back to the window. What will you do now? I held up my bandaged hand. Medical retirement, probably. 60% function is not enough for combat duty. They are talking about a desk job, but I cannot imagine spending the next 20 years filing reports about things that happen to other people. You could teach too. I laughed and it hurt my ribs. What would I teach? How to get carried by a sniper who sees the future. How to trust the people who see what you do not, Kane said quietly. How to know the difference between paranoia and preparation. How to count the seconds between breathing and bleeding. She walked away then, down that hall toward whatever came next. I watched her go and thought about the last 6 weeks, about snow and fire and the particular way Morrison's voice sounded when he knew he was going to die, about Chen bleeding out despite everything I tried to do, about Reeves smiling before Kane erased that smile with a bullet, about 3 seconds and what they meant. 6 months later, I found myself at Fort Benning, walking toward a classroom where Kane taught advanced tactical employment to soldiers who would never appreciate how much her paranoia might save them someday. I knocked on the doorframe. She looked up from the map she was marking, her ruined left hand holding the paper flat while her right made notations. A class of 30 students sat in perfect rows, watching her with the kind of attention that suggested she had already taught them what happened when you did not pay attention. "Sergeant First Class Kane," I said, using her new rank. "Got a minute?" She nodded to the class. "Take 15, study the scenario. I expect solutions when I return." They filed out, leaving us alone in a room covered with maps and target photos and diagrams of wind patterns that Kane could read like other people read newspapers. "Your hand," she said, looking at where my bandage had been replaced by a prosthetic. "How much function did you get back?" 80%, I said. "The surgeons were optimistic. I am cleared for limited duty. They are giving me an instructor slot here, teaching basic marksmanship to new recruits." Kane smiled. It was a real smile this time, not the sad ghost of one. "You will be good at that." "I learned from the best." She shook her head. "You learned from someone who was too stubborn to accept that regulations mattered more than reality. That is not the same as being the best." "Morrison learned too," I said. "He died knowing you were right. He told me that before we moved out. Said you were the only sane person at Iron Hollow." Kane's expression shifted, something painful working behind her eyes. "I visit them every month. Arlington, row after row of white stones. Morrison is there. Chen, Rodriguez, Palmer, Gonzalez, 42 markers that I can recite by name and location." "I know," I said. "I have seen you there." She looked at me sharply. "You follow me?" "I go there too," I said. "Different days. But I saw you once placing stones on the graves." "Jewish tradition, right? Leaving something to show you were there." "My mother was Jewish," Kane said. "She taught me that stones last longer than flowers. That remembering is more important than mourning." We stood there in silence. Two soldiers who had survived what 42 had not, trying to figure out if that made us lucky or cursed. "The students think you are too hard on them," I said. "I hear them talking in the mess hall. They call you the Ice Queen." Kane's smile returned. "Better that than the Mad Woman. At least ice implies control." "Do you sleep with your rifle?" She looked at the M24 that rested in a rack by her desk. "Every night. Some habits are too useful to break." "Even though you are not in the field anymore?" "Especially because I am not in the field anymore," Kane said. "Out there, the 3 seconds between breathing and bleeding are obvious. In here, they are subtle, but they still matter. Every student I train wrong is a bullet I have sent toward an American soldier 3 years from now. Every shortcut I accept is a grave I am digging for someone I will never meet." I thought about that, about the weight of teaching and the responsibility of making sure the next generation did not make the same mistakes that got their predecessors killed. "What do you tell them about Iron Hollow?" "I tell them the truth," Kane said. "That preparation looks like paranoia until the shooting starts. That the 3 seconds you spend checking your weapon before you need it are worth more than the 3 hours you spend wishing you had. That regulations are written for the last war, not the next one." "And do they listen?" "Some do," Kane said. "The ones who will survive. The others think I am crazy until they see combat and realize I was just experienced." A student poked his head in the door. "Sergeant Kane, we have solutions ready." "Give me a minute," Kane said. The student disappeared and she turned back to me. "What did you come here for, Riley? You did not walk across posts just to ask about my teaching methods." "I came to say thank you," I said. "You saved my life 4 times. I never properly acknowledged that." Kane's expression softened. "You were there when it mattered. You trusted me when Morrison thought I was insane. You helped me prepare even though you knew it would get you in trouble. That is thanks enough." I held out my hand, the prosthetic one, and she took it with her damaged left. Two soldiers who would never be whole again, shaking hands with the parts that remained. 3 seconds, I said. Kane nodded. The only measurement that matters. She went back to her class, and I walked out into Georgia's sunshine that felt nothing like the snow I still dreamed about. Somewhere, students were learning to count those seconds, to see patterns in chaos, to prepare for threats that doctrine said did not exist. And somewhere, Kane was teaching them, rifle always within reach, counting heartbeats and calculating the distance between paranoia and prophecy. I thought about Morrison and Chen and the 40 others who did not make it home. Thought about folded flags and Medal of Honor citations and the way pain could calcify into purpose if you carried it long enough. 3 seconds. That was what Kane had taught us. 3 seconds between seeing the threat and responding to it. 3 seconds that could mean the difference between Arlington and retirement. 3 seconds that Iron Hollow had tried to steal, but Kane had fought to preserve. I made it to my car before the memories hit, before I saw the snow and felt the cold and heard Morrison's last transmission crackling through a radio that had gone silent forever. Before I counted the seconds and realized that 3 was never enough to process what war took from you, but it was all you got to decide whether you would let it break you. Kane chose to teach, to take the scars and turn them into lessons, to make sure her paranoia became someone else's preparation. I chose to remember, to carry the names and faces and last words of men who trusted the system and paid for that trust with everything they had. Between us, maybe we could make sure Iron Hollow meant something more than just another failed forward operating base in a war that would be forgotten by everyone except the people who fought it. I started the car and drove toward the future, carrying the past in every breath, measuring time in heartbeats and seconds in the space between what regulations promised and what reality delivered. 3 seconds, count them carefully. They might be all you get. But sometimes if you prepare right, if you trust the people who see what you do not, if you refuse to let doctrine overrule instinct, 3 seconds is enough. Kane proved that. Morrison died believing it. And 42 soldiers rested under Arlington's stones knowing that someone had tried, even if trying had not been enough to save them all. The story ended there in that Georgia parking lot, with sun and memory and the quiet understanding that survival was its own kind of burden. But the lesson continued in classrooms where Kane taught, and on ranges where I instructed, and in every soldier who learned to count those seconds before they had to use them. 3 seconds between breathing and bleeding. 3 seconds between paranoia and prophecy. 3 seconds between following orders and staying alive. Kane had taught us to count, had shown us that preparation was just another word for caring whether your people made it home, had proven that sometimes the mad woman sleeping with her rifle is the only sane person in the room. The Army gave her a medal and a teaching position and the grudging acknowledgement that being right mattered more than being compliant. I gave her the one thing I had left. My word that I would tell this story, that Morrison and Chen and the 40 others would not become just numbers in an after-action report, that someone would remember what happened when doctrine met reality and reality won. This is that story. This is why 6 soldiers are alive. This is why paranoia saved Iron Hollow from complete annihilation. This is why 3 seconds matters. Count them. Remember them. Because someday, somewhere, they might be the only thing standing between you and a folded flag delivered to people who will never understand why you had to die in a place they cannot pronounce. Kane understood that. She counted every second. And 42 times counting was not enough. But 6 times it was. I will take those odds. I will carry those names. I will remember those seconds. Because Sarah Kane taught me that the only difference between the living and the dead is the 3 seconds you spend preparing for threats that everyone else says do not exist. She was right. She is always right. And somewhere in Georgia, she is still teaching, still counting, still sleeping with her rifle because some lessons cost too much to forget. 3 seconds. That is all any of us get. Make them count.